Looking for a comprehensive overview of all of the classes in Unicorn Overlord? Well, look no further. You found the place. My name is Tom, otherwise known as Titanium Legman, and welcome back to the channel.
Unicorn Overlord.
Hello everyone. If you enjoy a comprehensive, in-depth coverage of strategy RPGs, regular RPGs, or games in general, then a like and a subscription would be very much appreciated. This is the type of content that we do all the time around here, and I'm very happy to announce that I will be continuing to cover the entirety of Unicorn Overlord once it releases on March 8th. Thank you very much. I'm not going to spend much time before we get into it here. All I wanted to say is that there are a few classes that exist in the demo of Unicorn Overlord that have been left off this list, as they are not typically acquired without prior knowledge of where they are and how to get them. Since there's already a ton of classes in this video, I'll address those in the next part once the full game is released. Also, there are some statistics for each class that I won't be specifically speaking about unless it's relevant to the functioning of that class in the video. Things like the weaponry that they can wield, what unit type they are, how much stamina they have, and how much mobility they have. That will be in the ticker on the bottom next to their class name when we get to each new class. Check it out there. It's largely universal. All infantry tend to have the same stamina with a couple exceptions, the same mobility with a couple exceptions, that kind of thing. So check it out down there at the start of each section. Finally, if there is a particular class that you are looking for information on, all of these have been tagged in the description and in the scrubber bar at the bottom of the video. So if there's something in particular that you're looking for, you can skip around and find what it is that you need. Without further ado, let's begin with the Lord. Elaine, our Lord, is an all-around great frontline combatant and can fit into pretty much any squad early. If you've seen my video covering Elaine as a tank, you already have an idea of how he functions. He can protect himself and his allies with his various different passive abilities, and then heal up with his standard attack, or potentially neutralize cavalry with his anti-cavalry attack. Sword use gives him access to powerful early weapons if desired, but his base skills are already strong, so he prefers swords with good stats, not necessarily new abilities. He does have limited damage output until later levels, and presumably promotion, and is more defensive in the early game, though different swords can fix that. His Valor skills can give allies increased damage and a defense, as well as first strike or increased XP gain for one battle. His leader effect gives him increased Valor points on kill. He is essentially a better fighter, which we'll talk about next. Elaine will make good use of pretty much any equipment that you can find for him that will boost his offense and his defense. Anything that's going to make him a better brawler is going to be good here. Moving on to Fighter. These are early tank units specialized for guarding against ranged attacks like arrows, as well as more physical-based attacks that are still considered ranged, such as the Soldier's Javelin and the Griffon Knight's Wide Sweep. They can also buff their own defenses with Warding Slash, making tanking easier. However, they are limited in their ability to guard and deal damage early on, and have generally poor initiative as well. Although the Shield Bash skill at level 15 can stun enemies for control, which is pretty nice. However, they shine once more archers show up in squads and more ranged attacks come into play, especially when you begin fielding flying units like Griffon Knights. At level 10, they get the Quick Guard ability to improve their self-defense as well, so they really only get better with time. Much like the Lord, as we mentioned previously, sword use does give them access to good early weapons, which really fighters want more than potentially any other class to improve their limited attack options. They are a very equipment-reliant class, which is true to the idea of a fighter in classical stuff like D&D, so I kind of like that about them. They do have the Provoke Valor skill, which is very useful for funneling enemies into choke points, as well as its unique ability to force enemies out of entrenched positions and siege weapons. And while yes, we do have items that do this, those are limited. You have to buy them. Whereas Valor, you can earn over and over in a battle and use as many times as you have the points for. So Provoke, very efficient ability that you should get a lot of use out of. Their leader ability resists physical assist skills, and overall, it is a class that struggles in the early game, but should only improve as the game progresses. Next up is Paladins. This is an all-around incredible offensive and defensive unit with powerful support abilities to throw into the mix. It is of course aided by being the first pre-promoted unit that you have for a while in the game, but it should still scale well into the later game. It can attack, It can defend and heal in equal measure. It has the ability to perform follow-up attacks with pursuit while guarding and healing allies, and that really makes Paladins versatile enough to fight in either the front or back rows of nearly any unit. They, again, wield swords and can use the various early swords you can find in the game well, although, again, they don't necessarily need them. And Cavalry, as a class, makes this a great squad leader as well, giving its squad far more move speed than they might otherwise have, allowing for quick maneuvering around the battlefield. Their Valor skill Heal is useful for quickly restoring an injured squad, and their leader effect Resist Magic Assist is vital for early game missions against tower wizards before you have better options to deal with them. Speaking of defensive options, next we have the Hoplite. This is your standard tank option. They're big, they're slow, they're sturdy. If you're familiar with Armor Knights and things like Fire Emblem, you'll definitely understand this class. They dramatically increase squad resilience by guarding against attacks, and do enough damage with Sting to clean up weakened targets, especially if they are at 50% HP or below, at which point they get a damage boost. However, much like in Fire Emblem, they have plenty of weaknesses. They are very vulnerable to mages, as one might expect, as well as hammer-wielding warriors and debuffing units like Housecarls. They also slow the team down due to their low mobility, but that can be offset if you pair them with some cavalry, so not the end of the world. Their Valor skill Fortress negates all stage damage for an allied unit for 10 seconds. Things like Valor attacks, arrow rain, whatnot can be negated by this, which is situationally quite powerful, so something to keep in mind. And their leader effect is shared with fighters, reducing damage from ranged assist attacks. Continuing on with Lance Wielders, we have the Soldier. This is a strong, balanced infantry class that is extremely versatile. They deal good damage to columns, they're sturdy, they're quick, and they get bonus damage against cavalry, effective at poking through to squishy backliners as well. They can deal extra damage to flyers with their javelin ranged attack. They just have a lot going for them. They can also heal allies, as well as grant them guaranteed hits, throw a little bit of support in there, kind of almost makes them like a mini Paladin in a way, less defensive and more offensive, but still. And truly, a squad of these can be a terror to handle. I've run into a few encounters where the enemy just throws recurring reinforcements of 3 soldiers at you, and especially early in the game, that can be very difficult to punch through, because they're just sturdy enough, and they can all heal each other. Much like the Lord, they can fit into nearly any squad and be good, if not great. Their Valor skill Life Aid reses all downed units in a squad, saving you valuable resurrection items, which is huge. And their leader effect Quick Rest allows much faster stamina recovery, which is also very nice for efficiency. Next we have Knights. These are your mounted offensive experts. They deal double damage to infantry, they have high movement, their base skill Assaulting Lance can lead to infinite chaining kills as it restores an action point on kill, potentially sweeping entire squads with ease. And remember, Assaulting Lance only costs 1 AP in the first place, so it can just chain into itself infinitely with a little bit of luck and a little bit of setup. They have the Quick Guard skill, which makes them fairly resilient, blocking some damage on the first hit that they would receive. And they get an AoE stun as well as a cavalry buff skill once leveled, making squads of these truly, truly vicious. They are a great target for buffs, as well as any accessories that boost attack or give bonus actions, though they are vulnerable to lances, griffins, and magic. They do want some protection, unless you want a full squad that is just the glassest of cannons, which there could be a case made for that. I would not deny that possibility offhand. Their Valor skill Wild Rush deals big damage in an area on the map, increased even further against infantry, a very strong map attack offensive option, and they share the leader effect Quick Rest with soldiers, reducing wait times when resting. Moving on from lances to axes, we have the Housecarl. These are brutal infantry axe wielders. They deal huge damage as well as debuffing enemy defense to deal even more damage. They once again perform well in squads with each other due to stacking debuffs and their follow-up attacks. They also get an AoE defense debuff at level 10, as well as a debuffing counterattack at level 15. These guys are armored destroyers. Their follow-up attack makes them naturally one of the most damaging units in the early game and completely synergistic with themselves, and this skill set really makes them very easy to use. You don't really need to change a whole lot, just upgrade their gear as you find better stuff, slap them in the backline of a party that does a lot of physical damage, and watch them tear. Their Valor skill Vitalize restores 2 stamina to an ally unit, which is a very valuable skill if you need to quickly move a unit out of the way that ran out of stamina, or potentially keep pushing forward in a big attack. And their leader effect Barrier Breaker allows them to quickly destroy fortifications. Switching back from axes to swords, we have the Thief. This is an excellent frontline dodge tank, or backline debuffer through passive point stealing and poison skills. They are very hard to hit thanks to their naturally high evade and their evade skill, which, if they have the passive points for it, allows them to guaranteed evade a physical attack, which is just insanely strong. Like the Housecarl, they are naturally synergistic with themselves, as their passive point steal fuels their evade skill. They are notably vulnerable to archers and other true strike attacks, that is their natural counter, but units like fighters can very much help to mitigate this with arrow block. Really, their biggest weakness is their lack of versatility. Especially early on, you don't really want weapons on them that give new attacks, as their passive point steal is uniquely powerful, and their evade is much weaker without it. So, unless you're going for some sort of backline, I have another tank in the squad, support type of build thing, I would recommend just letting them rock with their natural skill set in the early game until we find some truly disgusting gear. Speaking of gear, their Valor skill Plunder steals a sizable portion of gold from the enemy. It's great for farming if you have some extra Valor points laying around. I highly recommend that you use this as often as possible so you can buy some of that really great gear. And they also have the Quick Rest skill, making recovery easier. Speaking of that natural counter to thieves, we have the Hunter next. This is going to be a vital tool and utility piece for their ability to snipe flyers, scouts, and dangerous backline units like mages. It is highly recommended to have at least one, preferably more, in your army to deal with these threats. They deal 2x damage against flying units of all kinds, and while they have average damage output otherwise, at least without any sort of fancy support, they do have guaranteed hits, and they can target the backline automatically, so they can still find points of weakness to punch through. They are a good target for attack buffs, as they can grant themselves a 100% chance to hit, and they level to gain multi-target damage and Pursuit, improving damage output even further. Pursuit being a Paladin ability that you also then pick up here that allows them to follow up ally attacks with an attack of their own. Very nice. Their Valor skill Arrow Rain does good AoE damage, increased against flyers, and it's a pretty large area as well, so not a bad damage option. And their Leader skill Ranged Assist gives them extra damage and can dramatically change the outcome of a fight for allies by allowing them to support by burning a point of stamina. Slapping these guys into a tower where they don't have to use stamina and fighting in that range will absolutely massively increase your total damage for a stage and should be a #1 priority if you have the opportunity to do so. If you're a little bit tired of small, noodly armed lads and instead want to pick up someone who looks like they could lift the entire bus, then you're looking for the Gladiator. These guys are simple frontline bruisers. They got big HP, big damage, and even bigger pecs, and their sweep attack makes them great at clearing the front line, while their self-heal makes them remarkably tanky. They do also level to get a counter version of Wide Sweep, which I believe is going to make them a pretty nasty force in the mid-game. That said, of course, everything needs its weakness. They have low accuracy and a lack of defensive stats, which means that they do want support so they don't get overwhelmed despite their massive HP pool and their limited self-heal. I found that they do pair well with Griffon Knights to allow your unit to sweep both rows of an enemy formation and just clear them with remarkable efficiency. Their Valor skill Toughness negates stamina loss and knocks an enemy back after battle, and their leader effect Barrier Breaker is shared with the Housecarl, destroying fortifications easily. Speaking of axe units who are big and burly, at least half of them are, we have the Warrior. Notably, the Warrior is unique for wielding the Hammer, which is an anti-tank utility piece, as well as standard axes as well if you don't feel like dealing bonus damage to armors at the moment, which you don't always want to do. Hammers give you a physical anti-armor option, crushing hoplites and fighters with complete ease, and their special ability Guard Seal gives you a workaround for high block units, again, like hoplites and fighters, letting other combatants hit for full damage. They level to get Assaulting Blow, allowing chain kills like Knights, which is very interesting. It's nice to know that there's more than one unit that can do this type of thing, and in fact there's even another one we'll talk about soon. And their Valor skill, Heavy Swing, deals okay AoE damage and makes them useful for clearing massed barricades. Notably, their damage output is good, but very limited, so I wouldn't get too invested in what these guys can do, at least as far as primary DPS is concerned. If you want primary DPS, that's where we have to talk about our next class, the Wizard. These guys are the damage king in the early game. They are massive burst damage DPS units that are also able to apply a damage over time effect. Their base fireball shreds any unit without good MR, and the burn will often finish off weakened enemies. They are, unsurprisingly, quite fragile, and unsurprisingly as a result, need a lot of protection to reach their full potential. However, they do level to get Magic Pursuit to give a magical follow-up attack for even more damage. Thought Paladins and Hunters were good for that? Well, wait until you're throwing around extra magic that enemies typically don't have the MR to deal with. Nasty. Very nasty. They make great use of attack point boosting equipment to spread fire around even more, and their Valor skill Blaze creates an area of denial fire whirlwind, dealing low periodic damage to enemies in the area for 10 seconds. Finally, much like the Hunter, they also have their own ranged assist, but this one is magical ranged assist. And again, when you have a lot of enemies on the board that are not very good at resisting magic, this one is going to be painful. If you haven't already encountered some tower mages from playing the demo yourself, then boy, oh boy, you are in for a very bad or very good time, depending on how you find yourself being able to deal with them, and you will very quickly learn that it's a strategy that you want to employ as well. Sticking these lads in some fortifications, a town, or a tower will make your life infinitely easier, I assure you. Moving from damaging magic to supporting magic, we finally have to talk about the Cleric. Nothing too particularly fancy or exciting about this one. If you know a Cleric in literally any other RPG on Earth, you know how Clerics work here. They are the bog standard RPG healer. They do have a mix of active and passive point heals, which does equate to massive healing output even at very low levels, which is very nice and very strong. They have no attacks to speak of. They can't even bop something with their staff, so the unit offense as a whole must be high to compensate for this lack, unless offense is not the goal. Once leveled, they can remove debuffs and even grant themselves a buff to prevent death when attacked, which is pretty fancy. Their Valor skill Heal is shared with Paladins and restores health to an allied unit. And most importantly, their leader effect Healing Assist, much like Magic Assist and Range Assist, is phenomenal for supporting ally units. As I'm sure you can imagine, instead of dealing damage to the enemy, this provides an entire unit-wide heal to your allies. And while it's not a huge chunk of healing, it can very often be the difference between success and failure. There are also numerous items in the early game to improve all of their abilities, from AP and PP boosting stuff to new staves that give them new spells to cast. There's a lot going on here that makes it so even though they're a standard cleric, they can still be a ton of fun and very, very powerful. Moving from very standard to less standard, but still in the realm of magic, we have the Witch. This is a mixed offensive utility unit, greater versatility than wizards as a result, but not quite as much damage output in return. They do have the ability to freeze enemies solid and potentially take them out of the fight for good if they're not hit by any further attacks, which is insanely powerful. This is, at least in the early game of the demo, the single most powerful crowd control effect you can find. And their magic missile attack that they get after leveling provides good damage against up to 2 foes, which means that they can at least try to compete with wizards. Really, their biggest strength early in the game is their Magic Conferral passive skill, though, granting an attacking ally magic damage on their next attack. This boost not only makes attacks more powerful in general, but allows you to punch through armor with ease. My poor Armor Knights, man, the Hoplite, really being done a disservice here. I thought they were going to be so much better in Unicorn Overlord, but at least in the early game, they really suffer. Man, they really suffer. Back to Witches, though, they're best paired with allies who hit multiple targets like the Soldier, the Griffon Knight, and the Gladiator to make the most of this magic conferral ability. Like wizards, they are fragile and require protection, but they can at least freeze things that might otherwise cause them harm, and they actually have 2 different Valor abilities at the start. Gravity, creating an AoE zone where enemies are slowed by 90% for 15 seconds! It's a really good map control piece. And they also have Teleport, which allows the Witch's unit to warp instantly to any ally or owned building to help fight off counterattacks, sneak attacks on your base. This is one of the more powerful units in the game, at least from what we've seen thus far. Similarly powerful, but for very different reasons, we have the Griffon Knight, who we mentioned previously in The Witch. This is an offense-oriented, dodgy frontliner. They have a huge damage output thanks to their sweep attack, then they get double damage against both grounded melee and cavalry classes. This is a row-hitting attack, much like what the Gladiator has, and it chunks. Even more impressively, this is one of the only quote-unquote melee attacks that is considered ranged and can hit the back row as well. So a whole backline of squishy wizards and clerics, not for long, because they're about to be in pieces once your Griffon Knight gets a hold of them, and God forbid you give them any damage buffs on top of that. It gets gnarly. Of course, we're not done. They are also naturally dodgy, have high magic resist, and they get even more evade against ground-locked units than what they naturally have. And to top it all off, as if that isn't enough, they also have a self-heal. This is by far one of my favorite classes in the game thus far, and one of the most devastatingly powerful classes that we have seen thus far in the game if you know how to use them properly. Their Valor skill, Hastened Call, doubles move speed for 30 seconds, which is great for traversal and navigating around dangerous opponents, and their leader effect, of course, allows flying over all terrain for their entire unit. They really saw flyers in Fire Emblem and said, alright, bet, we can do that, probably even better. And I dare say that they did. Really, their only major weaknesses are general fragility when they do manage to get hit by physical attacks, and they do take double damage arrow shots, which bear a near guaranteed one-shot, so ways to protect them from such effects will be vital. Remember when we mentioned another unit that could do kill chains? Well, we've got to them. It's the Sellsword. These are massively powerful sword fighters with equally massive thighs that focus near exclusively on offense. They're some of the highest single target damaging units in the early game. Their heavy blade attack does huge damage, 150 physical potency compared to the more standard 100 potency that most other units have, and their allied counter effect that allows them to counterattack when anyone in their unit is attacked by an enemy increases this damage even further. Of course, once leveled, they do get the killing chain effect that we've mentioned previously, giving them the same pop-off potential as knights and warriors and making them even more dangerous. With the right setup, and it's not a very hard setup to get going, a squad with even one sellsword can easily wipe an entire enemy unit. Of course, they do have very little defense to speak of, so support units do help immensely. But, on the flip side, their Valor skill Summon Warriors allows the summoning of NPC mercenaries who attack your enemies autonomously until they are either defeated or run out of stamina, and guess what? They don't typically clear the enemies out, but they sure do soften them up enough so you can get some more killing chains going. It's real nice and real nasty. I was flabbergasted when I first saw these units. Finally, their leader effect, Greater Garrison, increases the healing and stamina regen that they get when garrisoned, so slapping a unit with a sellsword at the front to hold the line on a bridge or something similar is a very solid way of holding the line for a significant amount of time. From one S to another, finally, we have to talk about Shamans. This is going to be your backline debuffer support class extraordinaire. There is no single better option for just completely shutting down a group of enemies than the Shaman. Like the Clerics, they have no attacks to speak of, but that makes them no less powerful. They have numerous curses that reduce enemy attack, initiative, passive points, and even seal their ability to get crits, which is just brutal. Really, even one Shaman can massively reduce enemy effectiveness, and I've seen that to good effect in my Lex squad, where I have one Shaman and Lex, and suddenly, Lex becomes the greatest tank on Earth because nothing is hitting him for more than like a couple points of damage unless they have magic, and even that gets severely reduced. This really is a vital class for assisting tanky units with frontliners like fighters and gladiators. You would be very much in the right mind if you feel like you want to get multiple of these and slap them into your squads wherever you can. Now, their Valor skill is not nearly as impressive as their normal skill set, but it does have its uses. It is the Clairvoyance effect, which reveals hidden enemies in an area, in a pretty large area, for 30 seconds, as well as increasing your accuracy by 50 in the area, which can certainly see its uses. If you're fighting a tanky or dodge tanky at the very least enemy leader squad on a tough fortification, slap this down and you might wind up having a much easier time hitting them than you would expect, even if you're attacking like griffins with melee units on the ground. Finally, their leader effect resists magic assists, much like paladins, and protecting them against wizards and the like, which is certainly not a bad effect to have. And with that, we've gone through the large list of the early game classes that you will be encountering in Unicorn Overlord. Again, there are some other classes here that you can get in the demo if you so choose that we have not yet spoken about, things like sword fighters, radiant knights, feather swords, and the like, but again, most people won't have encountered those just in their initial run-through of the demo, and there was enough to talk about here as it was. So we'll be leading off the next episode of our comprehensive class overview with those, as well as everything else that we begin to discover in the full release. Will we be able to fit everything into just a part 2, or will there be a part 3? I get the distinct feeling there will be a part 3, especially because once we can see all of the promotions for these units, there's going to be a lot more to talk about with them as well, and we'll probably be covering them in their own separate entries. For now, though, Thank you all so much for watching. I do very much appreciate it. My name has been Tom, otherwise known as Titanium Legman. If you have any notes about anything that I said here today, any questions or anything else that you would like to bring up, please drop it in the comments or strike up a conversation in my Discord, where the conversation about Unicorn Overlord has been incredibly lively. I have not been able to keep up with it, and I only expect that to pick up once March 8th comes around and the game is fully released. Until then, though, I implore you, please, have a good night, stay safe and healthy out there, and remember, be good to each other. Bye now.